Hello, in this video I will explain how you can add a rating component to your SAS Visual Analytics report. I guess that you have already evaluated a movie on your preferred streaming platform or that you have already rated a product you bought online. This is exactly the kind of functionality which will be covered in this video. I will first explain the different components. We have the data-driven content object, which is specific object designed for customized element into Visual Analytics. The data-driven content object will use a SAS Viya Job behind the scene to register the data into a cast table, and there will be a little demo to demonstrate the application and, more importantly, how it was created. The data-driven content object is a standard Visual Analytics object, like the graph or the table object. But you can use them to implement functionalities which may not be available out of the box in SAS Visual Analytics. You can, for example, use D3.js or other JavaScript frameworks to build visuals or to retrieve data from the web or from other data providers, for example. Technically, the data-driven content object has access to the same data as any other objects in the report. You get automatic interaction with the other objects in the report to filter them, for example. From a development perspective, the data-driven content object is an HTML page with a bit of JavaScript to manipulate the data coming from the report and send the data back to it. SAS provides some utility functions on GitHub to ease the development of such a web page. The SAS Viya Jobs provide functionalities that are similar to the ones of the SAS 9 stored processes. SAS Viya Jobs are executed from the web through HTTP request, and the requests are sent to the SAS job execution endpoint. Behind the scene, the jobs are executed on a compute server, which is the replacement of the SAS workspace server or the SAS stored process server. You can build the jobs using SAS Studio or the SAS Job Execution web application, SAS Studio being the preferred option. If you are familiar with SAS 9 stored processes, JSBegin and JSEnd autocall macros will be familiar to you. They are the replacement for stpbegin and stpend in SAS 9. A job is a combination of different things: a prompt written in HTML or XML, a job definition which contains the information about the prompt to use or not to use, and the parameters for the SAS code, and finally the SAS code that will be executed. The job parameters are used to pass data from the prompt to the SAS code using SAS macros and SAS macro variables. Let's go for a demo. I will open up my environment here and connect to Visual Analytics. So this is the SAS Visual Analytics report. I will switch to viewer mode. I have a list table on the left-hand side, a form table, a form in the data-driven content object, and a bar chart. If I select, for example, here a car, you see that the car is reflected in the form. So the list table is passing data to the data-driven content object. If I do a selection here and a rating and I save, you will see that Isuzu brand will appear in the bar chart and is now available. Let's reduce it. You see that behind the scene we are using a SAS Viya Job, which is called and execute the call and save the data to a cast server. Let's have a look at the code itself before we dive a bit more deeply into the report construction. This is the Viya Job that I have created. It's reading data from an in file, a file service, and the data are coming into a JSON format. So to use the JSON format, I'm using the line name statement or with JSON option. I then create a cast session, assign a library using the cast limname engine. Then I use the input data and store it into my CAS, so the CAS user table under CAS rate, and I'm doing an append. If the data is not available or the data doesn't exist, it will create a new CAS table for it. And what I want to do is check if the table exists and do a table promote to make sure that the table will be persisted between execution. At the end of the execution, what we will do, we will send an answer back to the job in the form of a JSON object in this case, and the JSON object will be containing the return code and the user ID of the user that was executing the code. Normally, you can define a prompt, but you will see that here we have no form used with the report. The form will be in an external web page. You have here the information about the job submit. This is where you can execute the URL that you can use to execute the code. And you have the parameters, and here the parameters, they are automatically generated for you. There is nothing specific over here. Let's go back to the report. And so we will switch to edit mode and see what is happening. We have here the list table and the DDC object. If we select the list table and look at the actions, we will see that the list table is filtering or is linked to the data-driven content object. As a result, when we select here a car, the maker and the model are updated automatically in the form. When we submit, as we have seen, the bar chart is used, and the bar chart is using the second table called cars rate, and this is the table that was created by the job. So you might wonder how the form is generated, and this is what we will see right away. So this is Visual Studio Code, but you can use any text editor. The benefit of Visual Studio Code is that you can also run a small web server, which is what we have done here to build your application. In the head of the HTML page, we have the messaging util.js, which is provided by SAS. It's available on GitHub. We have a job execution util. This is something that I have created myself, and we will see that later. And finally, we have calls to external JavaScript libraries for jQuery, Bootstrap, and Font Awesome. For the style, I've introduced the style directly in the HTML page because the style is really limited as we are building the application using and benefiting from Bootstrap CSS. Then the body of the HTML page is just a form, and we will populate that form. How do we populate that form? We will execute a display form function as soon as we get data from the SAS report. This is where we are getting the data using the messaging util that has been provided by SAS, and on data received callback, we will use display form. The display form, what it does, it creates the form elements. So the different form elements based on the data that we are receiving from the message. So the data received from the Visual Analytics report. And then we are creating a rating component, adding a submit button, adding a title to the form, and these form elements are stored in an array. So what we need to do then is group these elements from the array, join them, and write them to the evaluation div, or form in this case. So this is the location. Then we are adding a function that will highlight the stars that are selected. So this is the small function. On the click event, it will change the color and toggle the class to be checked. The class checked is the one that we defined here for orange. Then we have the submit button, and then on the submit button, we are preventing the default submit because we want to manipulate a bit the data and to execute a specific call. And in that case, we are reading all the data, all the input to retrieve the manufacturer and the brand. or the model of the car. And then we are retrieving the rating data and counting the number of stars which have a checked status to get the information. We are then calling the SAS Viya job. This is the URL of the Viya server, the name of the program, this is where it is stored. And then we call the execute job. We see that we are removing the checked so that it's empty for the next execution. Execute job, this is a function that is defined in the job execution util. We are passing the URL, some data and the parameters, and when we get the response, we write it to the console log. The job execution util will use different functions. There is one to get the CSRF token for the job execution. This is to ensure that the calling application is trusted. You have the check status, which will check the status of the state of the job because it will be running in the background. So we are submitting and then pinging the server from time to time to check if the job is ended or not, or completed or not. Then we retrieve the job output. To retrieve the job output, we need to use the CSRF token that was generated. And we see here that we are retrieving some JSON based on the job ID. As soon as we get the data, we are using this data. Then we have the real execute job function, which uses the URL, the data that is passed to it, and the parameters. We are getting the CSRF parameters. We are making sure that we are authenticated properly. We are specifying the CSRF token. And for the parameters, we are getting the parameters that are passed to the function and adding two other parameters, underscore action and underscore output type, to specify that we want to run the job in the background and that we want to create an output in the form of a JSON object. Then we manipulate and create a new URL search, which is appended to the job URL. We then do a post to the job. We specify the data, and the data should be a JSON string, which is passed to it. The job is then executed. When we execute the job, we are retrieving the job info to get the ID of the job. We are then checking the job status, and as soon as the job is completed, we are processing the job output and outputting the data. So this is basically the function that are used. We are running on localhost over here, and this is the URL that has been defined into our object here. So we are listening on localhost 3000. To implement that on your server, you need to make sure that CSRF and CORS are properly configured on your environment and that you can get access. Otherwise, you will get errors related to CORS into your application. I'm done with the demonstration. If you want to get more information, you can have a look at the SAS Job Execution Web Applications Users Guide. You can find also multiple blogs and videos on this topic, and they will help you to better understand how SAS Viya Jobs can be used in SAS Viya, as well as the data-driven content object. Thank you for watching, and check back with the Technical Insights and Expertise series for additional tips.